Holcomb, Kansas, is a small farming town hidden in the wide open plains of the American Midwest. The land around it is flat and stretches for miles in every direction, with fields of wheat and corn swaying in the wind. The town itself has always been quiet and steady, with neighbors who knew each other well and families who had lived on the same land for generations. At first glance, Holcomb looks like a place where nothing bad could ever happen. A safe community in the heartland where life is measured by harvests and seasons rather than by violence. Yet in 1959, that calm image was shattered forever when the town became the center of one of the most infamous crimes in American history. On the edge of Holcomb stood the Clutter Farmhouse, a large 14-room home that rose above the surrounding farmland. It was built strong and was filled with the signs of a hard-working family. Herbert Clutter was a successful farmer who had built a respected name in the community. He was known for his discipline and his strong values, and he worked hard to provide for his wife, Bonnie, and their 4 children. By the fall of 1959, only their 2 youngest still lived at home. Nancy was 16 years old and known for her kindness and bright spirit, while her younger brother, Kenyon, was 15 and spent much of his time with projects and school. The family represented what many believed to be the very best of small-town America. They had friends, routines, and the comfort of a steady life on the land. That sense of safety and order would not survive the night of November the 15th in 1959. 2 ex-convicts, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith, had been recently paroled from prison in Kansas. While behind bars, Hickok had heard from another inmate that Herbert Clutter kept thousands of dollars hidden in a safe inside his home. It was a rumor that would set a deadly plan into motion. There was no safe, and Herbert Clutter was known for paying by check instead of carrying cash. But Hickok believed his story. He convinced Perry Smith to join him in a robbery that would supposedly give them enough money to start a new life in Mexico. The 2 men drove more than 400 miles across Kansas and reached the Clutter farmhouse in the early hours of November the 15th. They entered the house, tied up the family, and searched for the safe that did not exist. When they realized there was no fortune to be found, they made the choice that would forever stain the farmhouse and the town of Holcomb with blood. At night, Herbert and Bonnie Clutter, along with Nancy and Kenyon, were murdered inside their home. Each of them was killed, so there would be no witnesses left behind. The killers fled into the night, carrying almost nothing of value. They escaped with just $42 in cash, a portable radio, and a pair of binoculars. The crime was not only brutal, but also senseless, and it left neighbors and friends in disbelief. People could not understand how a quiet farm family in the middle of Kansas could be wiped out for so little. The news spread quickly across the country, and for many Americans it was the first time they realized that such violence could reach into the heart of their own communities. The investigation that followed stretched across several states and quickly became one of the largest manhunts Kansas had ever seen. Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together leads and tracking movements that led them far beyond the quiet fields of Holcomb in Kansas. The crime had left the community shaken and desperate for answers, and pressure weighed heavily on law enforcement to find those responsible. Eventually, through a combination of witness statements, careful police work, and the careless actions of the killers themselves, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith were tracked down and arrested. Their capture brought relief to the town, but the story was far from over. The trial that followed drew enormous attention. The details of the murders were laid bare in the courtroom, and the calm faces of the killers were shown to the world. Every piece of evidence pointed directly to them, and it became clear that justice would demand the highest price. The men were found guilty and sentenced to death, a punishment that reflected the brutality of what had been done inside the Clutter home. For years, appeals and delays kept the case alive, and during that time both Hickok and Smith became infamous names. Yet the outcome never changed. For the people of Holcomb, there was a sense of closure, but it was incomplete. The Clutter family could not be brought back, and the farmhouse where the crime occurred still stood as a physical reminder of that night. The killings did not just remain a Kansas story. Reporters from across the country poured into the area, writing about the tragedy, the trial, and the strange cruelty of two men who had gained nothing but death and destruction from their crime. Among them was the writer Truman Capote, who came to Holcomb with his friend Harper Lee. Truman stayed for months talking with townspeople, investigators, and even the killers themselves. He recorded their words, studied their behavior, and began crafting a book that would forever link his name to the Clutter murder case. In 1966, he released In Cold Blood, a true crime book that mixed real reporting with a storyteller's style. The book shocked readers with its level of detail and its cold, unflinching view of the murders.
One of the reasons why we don't want to be on camera is we're not going to sensationalize it even farther. There were 45 inaccuracies in just the part that's about the family, which makes me wonder how much of the rest of it's actually even real.
Over time, the Clutter murders were revisited again and again in documentaries and TV specials. Cold-blooded. The Clutter family murders offered a deeper look into the case, giving modern audiences the chance to revisit the horror that once swept across Holcomb. Each retelling brought new attention to the farmhouse that still stood on the edge of town, a building that had once been filled with life but was now forever marked by death. It remains a quiet town, one that has rebuilt itself since the day it was thrust into the world's gaze. The fields still stretch wide, the air is still calm, and families continue to live and work there. But for many, the town's name is forever tied to the Clutter murders, and the farmhouse stands as a constant reminder of the night when safety was shattered and innocence was lost. The Whaley House rises in Old Town San Diego, a proud brick building that seems to carry the past in its walls. Built in 1856 by Thomas Whaley, it was considered the most elegant home in Southern California. Crafted from bricks made in Whaley's own brickyard and furnished with rich mahogany, rosewood, Brussels carpets, and velvet drapes. More than just a residence, the home became a center of life in the growing town, hosting the county courthouse, a general store, and even a theater on the second floor. But beneath the beauty and ambition, the house stood on ground already marked by death. The Whaley family's life inside the house was touched by deep sorrow. In 1858, Thomas and Anna's first son, Thomas Jr., died from scarlet fever at just 18 months old. The loss left the family devastated, but darker tragedies followed years later. In that same house, their daughter, Violet Eloise, married George Bertolacci in 1882, only to discover he was a con man who had tricked her for money. Shamed and broken, Violet fell into depression, and in 1885, she ended her life inside the house with her father's revolver. She left behind a haunting note taken from a poem lamenting her despair. Her death devastated her sister Corinne, whose engagement was broken off after the scandal, leaving her to care for the family until her own passing decades later. The Whaley house, once filled with laughter and community, became instead a place where grief weighed heavy in every room. Paranormal claims have surrounded the house for over a century. Some visitors have reported strange sounds or fleeting movements, often attributed to the tragic history of the property. Stories mention Yankee Jim, the man executed on the land before the Whaleys built their home, and the Whaley family members who suffered within its walls. Whether or not these claims are true, they have become part of the house's long and complex history. If you've ever heard of the Lizzie Borden house, you probably know it's one of the most infamous murder spots in the United States. It's in Fall River, Massachusetts at 232nd Street, and back on August the 4th, 1892, the house went from a normal family home to the center of one of the most shocking crimes of the century. That morning, Lizzie Borden's father, Andrew, and her stepmother, Abby, were found brutally murdered with an axe. The story made national headlines almost immediately. Lizzie became the prime suspect, and the trial that followed captured the attention of the entire country. Newspapers everywhere covered it in detail, and people couldn't stop talking about it. Even though she was eventually acquitted, the murders left a mark on the house, the town, and Lizzie herself. To this day, the house carries that dark, uneasy energy. The house itself isn't huge or fancy. Andrew Borden was wealthy and influential, but he lived a very frugal life. There was no indoor plumbing, no electricity, just the basics. Lizzie, her sister Emma, and their stepmother Abby lived there along with their maid Bridget. From the outside, it looks like a typical Victorian home, but inside, it was orderly and quiet. That makes what happened that morning even more horrifying. The murders were sudden, violent, and completely unexpected. People in the town were shocked that something so brutal could happen in such a normal, respectable household. After the killings, Lizzie stayed in the house for a while, and even though she wasn't convicted, her life was never the same. Savannah, Georgia, is a city full of history and beauty, but it's also a place where the past never really goes away. Its streets are lined with cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and the old oak trees hang heavy with Spanish moss that sways in the wind like ghostly curtains. But Savannah isn't all charming streets and pretty buildings. It has a dark side, a shadow that lingers just beneath the surface. The Mercer-Williams House on Monterey Square is a place where death, secrets, and stories of restless spirits are whispered by locals, where visitors often feel a chill in the air as soon as they step onto the property. From the outside, it looks like a perfect, majestic mansion frozen in time. But inside, the house has been a witness to deaths and events so tragic that some say the energy of those moments still lingers, making it one of the most haunted houses in Savannah, and perhaps in all of Georgia. The house was first built for General Hugh Wheaton Mercer in 1860, but the Civil War stopped construction, and Mercer never got to live there. It was finished in 1868 by John Wilder, but still, no Mercer ever lived in it. Over the years, it was used for other purposes, even by the Shriners, and then it sat empty for almost a decade in 1969. A man named Jim Williams bought the house and spent years restoring it, filling it with antiques, tapestries, and all kinds of rare treasures. Williams loved the house and made it his home, hosting parties that brought the city's elite into his grand halls. But the house was already marked by tragedy, and not long after he moved in, a young boy named Tommy Downs fell from the roof and died on the iron fence below. Some say it was an accident, but others whisper that something unseen pushed him, and his spirit has never left. The most famous and shocking event happened in 1981, when Jim Williams shot and killed Danny Hansford, a young man who worked for him and was also his lover. Williams claimed it was self-defense, but he was put on trial 4 times over the killing. Some thought he was guilty, others believed he was only targeted because of who he was. He was finally acquitted, but only months later he died at home near the spot where Hansford was killed. Many believe the stress, guilt, and maybe even Hansford's spirit played a role in his death. Since then, the house has had countless reports of ghosts, from Tommy Downs falling again and again to the shadowy presence of Jim Williams and Danny Hansford wandering the halls. Visitors and staff have seen strange figures, heard footsteps, and even caught images of a small boy in photos, all adding to the mansion's eerie reputation. But still the question remains, when you walk through those doors, will the ghosts notice you too? In Boise's North End, where quiet streets and ordinary houses create a sense of safety, one home hides a memory too dark to forget. At 805 West Linden Street, locals whisper about the Boise murder house, known more chillingly as the Chop Chop House. Its story begins in June of 1987 when the basement became the setting for a crime so gruesome that the house's name is spoken with unease even decades later. From the outside, it looks unremarkable. A simple two-story structure with ordinary windows and siding. Yet for those who know the truth, the walls of this home carry a weight of violence that cannot be erased. Shadows linger in the corners, and the quiet of the neighborhood cannot hide the darkness that once filled this house, a darkness that refuses to fade from memory. The victim was 21-year-old Preston Murr, who entered the home on June the 30th, believing he was among friends. Inside were Daniel Rogers and Darren Cox, men he thought he could trust. But within the basement, trust twisted into betrayal, and an argument spiraled into a nightmare. Where a pew-pew was raised, a shot was fired, and Murr's life ended on the cold floor beneath the house.
A two-story house that stands out for its architectural style off Broadway Avenue is infamous for what happened inside its walls.
It's listed like third in the United States as haunted houses.
Deanne Davis lived in the home from 2008 to 2009 with her daughters. People often knocked on her door, hoping to get a peek inside the so-called murder house.
It had a lot of fame that people would want to come by and have a tour of the house.
Court documents say in 1987, an argument broke out between Preston Murr and two others. He was shot in the shoulder. Bleeding profusely, he pounded on the front door of neighbors, pleading with his attackers to let him go. One man called 911, witnessing Murr being dragged back into the home.
Okay, what's the problem there?
I don't know. A couple of guys came up and beat on the door, and I went out and looked, and there's some blood on the door, it looks like.
Okay, can you see him down the street at all?
There looks like something's going on in the house across the street.
Later, Murr was shot in the back of the head and dismembered. A week later, parts of his body surfaced more than 100 miles away in the Brownlee Reservoir. But rumor is, the 21-year-old soul will forever haunt this home.
There was a different aura downstairs when you'd go in the basement, and evidently that's where the mishaps happened. They didn't like to go in there. Nobody wanted to go in there.
Deanne didn't feel uneasy living in the house, but the urban legend has kept many away.
A lot of people are afraid of the house. Some won't even sleep there. And I had a medium, and she wanted to observe the place and go in there for a night. And she never did, though.
Yet death was only the beginning of the horror. What Rogers and Cox chose to do next transformed the killing into something that shocked even hardened investigators. Their actions ensured the house's name would never be forgotten, embedding terror into the walls themselves. Justice followed, but it brought little comfort. Rogers was sentenced to death, while Cox received a lesser sentence, yet their punishment did nothing to lift the shadow hanging over the house. The home still stands in Boise's north end, its walls carrying the memory of what happened in the basement on that summer night in 1987. For some, it is just another house. For others, it is a reminder that evil can hide in the most ordinary places, and that some darkness never truly fades. Thank you for watching. If this story unsettled you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. You never know what horrors might be hiding in our next story.